On this edition of Early Look, I'm going to be previewing the new UFC 310 co-main event. Someone's O has got to go. Shavkat Rakhmonov, Ian Machado Garry. And if you never watched the show before, my name is James Lynch. I'm going to go through a bunch of different stats, a bunch of different intangibles. Then I'm going to give you my prediction for this fight at the end. Some of the stuff may have relevance to you. It may not. I want to hear your prediction at the end, and we can debate about how this fight is going to play out. Would love to hear from you in the comments. And before I get into everything, make sure you hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit that notification bell. Really helps out the channel big time. Okay, let's do a quick tail of the tape like we usually do. Again, this is the co-main event, and it's 5 rounds. No interim title, but still a 5-round fight. Glad the UFC went with that. And right now you can see Shavkat is 18-0, Ian Garry 15-0, 30-27, 6'1" to 6'3", 77-74. So you'll see there, Garry with a bit of a height advantage, but the reach advantage going to Shavkat, and Gary's a little bit younger as well. But let's start first with the nomad, Shavkat Rakhmonov, who's finally going to be fighting. He's had a bit of a layoff coming into this one. So right now, Shavkat, you can see there is 18-0. Like I mentioned, he's got 8 knockouts, 10 submissions, and 0 decisions. He's currently ranked number 3 in the division. He is 30 years old. He is 6'1" with a 77-inch reach. So he'll have a 4-inch reach advantage in this fight. He's a master of sport in combat sambo and a master of sport in MMA. Trains out of Kazakhstan top team and Kill Cliff FC. He's the former M1 welterweight champion. He's got performance of the night 2 times against Carlton Harris and Neil Magny. He's got fight of the night 1 time against Jeff Neal, and he's got the longest finish streak in UFC welterweight division history at 6. Shavkat did not make his amateur debut, made his amateur debut back in September of 2014, made his pro debut in October, so a month later for M1 Challenge, and then did not make his UFC debut until October of 2020. He is 6-0 in the UFC. He's got 5 submissions and 1 win by KO TKO. Some notable wins include, I wanted to count this one because this was outside the UFC, but he had a win over Jung Young Park, who obviously is at middleweight, back in 2016. But in the UFC, he's only got a couple notable wins, that being Alex Oliveira, Neil Magny, Jeff Neal, and most recently Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. He doesn't have any losses, and he's never gone the distance in his UFC career. In fact, he's never gone the distance, period, in his career. It's pretty incredible. 18 fights, never seen the judges' scorecards. That could play a role in this fight. We'll talk about that a little bit later. He's had a couple layoffs in his career, dating back to when he was going from M1 to the UFC. There was a 484-day layoff. So I know there's obviously COVID going on during that time. So that was a bit of a delay in his career. Then going from Oliveira to Prazeres, there was a 245-day layoff. Going from Prazeres to Harris, there was a 224-day layoff. And then going from Wonderboy to Wonderboy to Ian Garry, there is a 357-day layoff. That's the longest of his UFC career. I said Bilal because obviously he was supposed to fight Bilal, and now he's fighting Ian Garry. So yeah, the one thing we got to mention for this breakdown, obviously, is that Shavkat knew he would be fighting on this card. He's had plenty of notice back when they booked the fight with Bilal Muhammad. He also knew it was 5 rounds. So again, other than a different opponent, Shavkat's had lots of notice for this fight. He hasn't been in any close fights, like I mentioned, because he obviously has finished all of his opponents. And as far as the UFC stats, let's go have a look at those. We can look at how he's performing on there. 1 second. So you look at it there, Shavkat's significant strike landed per minute is 4.12, so that's a pretty high rate. His striking accuracy is at 61%. His striking defense is at 51%, so he does get hit a little bit. His takedown average is 1.49. His takedown accuracy is only at 29%. His takedown defense is at 100%, and his submission average is 1.8, which is fairly high. So yeah, that is pretty much everything you need to know about the nomad, Shavkat Rakhmonov. Big opportunity here against Ian Garry in the co-main event of UFC 310. Now let's talk about his opponent, Ian Machado Garry, who is taking this fight, I guess, a week earlier. We found out, obviously, a little while ago that Ian would be fighting in the main event for UFC Tampa, so he fights a week earlier in this spot. And like I mentioned, he is 15-0. He's got 7 knockouts, 1 submission, and 7 decisions. He's currently ranked number 7 in the welterweight division. He's 27 years old, 6'3" with a 74-inch reach. So he's 3 years younger. Will have a 2-inch height advantage in this fight. The reach, like I mentioned, going to Shavkat Rakhmonov. He's a judo black belt, trains at a shoot box. Also used to train at Kill Cliff. So these two have trained together before. So maybe that'll benefit. I don't know who it'll benefit, either fighter, but obviously they've been in there together, so pretty familiar. And Ian Garry, obviously the former Cage Warriors welterweight champion. He's got performance of the night 1 time against Daniel Rodriguez. He's tied with Leon Edwards for 3rd longest win streak in UFC welterweight division history at 8. And he's got the 3rd highest significant strike accuracy in UFC welterweight division history at 55.4%. Garry made his amateur debut way back in 2017, so a little bit later than when Shavkat did. made his MMA debut in February of 2019. So I think a year earlier than when Shavkat made his debut, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Shavkat made his UFC debut in October of 2020. So Ian Garry just made his debut like a year earlier. So you can kind of see the experience gap there a little bit. Made his UFC debut in November of 2021. So makes his pro debut in 2019, and then makes his UFC debut like a few years later, back in 2021 when he fought Jordan Williams, which that fight seems like ages ago. Garry, like I mentioned, is 8-0. He's got 3 stoppage victories. His notable wins include Daniel Rodriguez, although that was a short notice fight, Neil Magny, and Jeff Neal. They do have that common opponent in Neil Magny, obviously Shavkat finishing him. And actually, they have 2 common opponents, Neil Magny and Jeff Neal. Garry taking a decision to both of them, Shavkat finishing both fighters. So take that for what it's worth. MMA math is not everything. He's only had 1 layoff in his career. That was going from Keenan Song to Daniel Rodriguez. There was a 245-day layoff. He's already fought this year back in June. Actually, sorry, he's fought 2 times already this year against Neil and Venom Page. So already has 2 fights under his belt, which is interesting. And Shavkat going to be fighting for the first time this year. I mentioned the layoff, obviously, earlier before that. Should mention that Garry has fought 5 rounds before, in case anyone was wondering about that. He did fight Jack Grant to a decision at Cage Warriors 125 back in June of 2021. So he's gone 5 rounds before. So if it does go that, I don't think there'll be any concerns about the cardio. Let's look at Garry's stats here. You can see his significant strikes landed per minute is higher than Shavkat. He's at 5.50. Striking accuracy is 55%, so lower than Shavkat. Significant strikes landed, striking defense is at 52%. Takedown average is 0.77. His takedown accuracy is at 59%. His takedown defense is at 69%. His sub average is at 0.03. So some of those stats a little bit lower there than Shavkat. Okay, we don't have full odds on this. I did look on Twitter. It looks like BetOnline has Rakhmonov is a big favorite here, -300. The comeback on Garry is +250. And then if you look on Tapology, which again, you don't have to bet any money, 86% of people picking Rakhmonov, 14% picking Garry. I see this fight a bit closer because I do have some questions about Shavkat going the distance, and obviously he's got a big layoff coming into this. But my official pick for this fight is going to be Shavkat Rakhmonov by 3rd round submission. Now here's why. Let's have a quick look here. So, a couple things. First and foremost, Shavkat, the majority of his wins have come by submission. Look at it there, 56% by submission, trailing just closely behind. Knockout is at 44%. But if you look at who Shavkat's knocked out, the only guy he's knocked out in the UFC is Carlton Harris. Ian Garry's a lot better than him. Most of these wins have come by submission. His last, knockout win before the Harris fight was way back in 2019, where he was knocking out a lot of guys. But I would say Ian Garry, obviously more of a caliber opponent. Garry's obviously not lost in his career either. I mentioned there, Shavkat has not had a knockout since 2022. The one thing with Garry is he does get hit a lot. Now, granted, he's fought 2 decent strikers in his last 2 fights. He fought Michael Venom Page and Jeff Neal. Venom Page was able to get more strikes on it. Actually, maybe I'll just quickly look that up. I feel like Venom Page actually landed more. Oh, no, hold on. We've got it right here. So if you look at the Jeff Neal fight, Jeff Neal landing 46 significant strikes. Actually, Neal did end up landing more than Michael Venom Page, which is interesting. Kind of watching the fights, I figured it would have been the other way around. So So Jeff landed 46 of 89 shots against Ian Garry. Michael Venom Page was only able to land 21. So that's a lot less than what Neal was able to do. I think Shavkat's going to have a lot more output. And keep in mind, this is a 5-round fight as well. So I would imagine Shavkat's going to get more on him. And, I would say that Shavkat, he's a bit more of, he's got a little bit more urgency, a little bit more, like that was the thing with Jeff Neal, is that he was always trying to load up for that big shot. I expect Shavkat to be a lot more aggressive in this fight. And Garry does get hit. And, I brought this up a few fights ago, but, Keenan Song was able to tag Ian Garry, and that fight was just last year. Outside of that, if you look at it, Jeff Neal had a real hard time dealing with the height and reach. I don't think Shavkat's going to have to worry about that. They're almost the same size. And Venom Page is a little bit older. So I would imagine he's going to be a bit slower than Shavkat. He's 37. I mean, I would think that Shavkat's going to be, a little bit faster in that spot. Now, on the flip side, Shavkat doesn't have the best head movement himself, but I don't think he has to worry about that with Ian Garry, because as we've seen in Gary's last couple fights, he's not knocking guys out really. I mean, he's knocking out a Daniel Rodriguez or a Keenan Song, but again, if we're talking about competition, Shavkat's far better than both those guys. I don't think Gary's going to be able to point fight like he did with Jeff Neal in this matchup. I could see Shavkat, posing more problems. Shavkat's a little bit more unorthodox as well. And I'll be completely honest, I didn't think Garry looked that great in the fight with MVP. And that's a fight that I think he should have performed a lot better in, considering how old MVP is. And, MVP had not really been tested even outside the UFC that much. To me, Garry, if he is really this, superstar that, people are sort of touting him to be, or a future champion, to me, you got to finish guys like MVP and Jeff Neal, and he wasn't able to do that. In fact, the Jeff Neal fight, I felt like, and even his coach, Jeff's coach, Saif Sayud, told me recently in an interview, he felt like Garry was point fighting. You're not going to be able to do that against Shavkat, who's very dangerous. And I think Shavkat's got a bit of that ick factor, and I've talked about this before, and I've done breakdowns where, there's something different with Shavkat than other fighters you see. He's finishing these guys. He's finishing a Stephen Thompson. He's only the second fighter in the UFC that's finished Wonderboy. I think Anthony Pettis was the other one. Well, now third with Buckley, obviously, but at the time he was only the second fighter to finish Stephen Thompson in the UFC. That's very impressive, and he finished him in the second round. Like, that's hard to do. Jeff Neal, only guy to finish Jeff Neal in the UFC. Again, very impressive. Finished Neil Magny. Like, he's going out there and he's not just winning fights, he's finishing his opponents, and I think that killer instinct will pay dividends. Now, look, could Ian Garry win this fight? Yes, he could avoid getting finished by Shavkat, or maybe Shavkat tires out in the later rounds. Actually, come to think of it, I wanted to double check something. I don't think pretty sure Shavkat, yeah, he's never gone the distance in any of his fights. So we can take that out of the equation of him, going 5 rounds. But that's, again, I think the path to victory for Garry is surviving the early onslaught from Shavkat, taking it into deep waters, and then maybe Shavkat gets tired and fades a little bit in the later rounds. But that's just a guess. I don't know how good or how bad Shavkat's cardio is. To me, Shavkat's got more ways to win. He's got knockout power. He's got, obviously, really, really good on the ground as well. I like that finishing ability better than Garry's ability to just, point fight and kind of stay in range. Like, he's not going to be able to do what he's done against MVP and Jeff Neal against Shavkat, because Shavkat's far more aggressive. Now, like I mentioned, the layoff's a bit of a concern for Shavkat, but I don't think, it's not like he's been sitting on the couch. I'd be willing to bet he's been in the gym training really hard. And remember, he's supposed to fight Bilal Muhammad for the title. He's got to be a little pissed off about that too. He knows he's got to make a statement, and he's got to win this fight if he wants to get that title shot against Bilal. So I give him credit. But yeah, I think Shavkat gets it done. Again, I'm going on a little bit of a leap of faith. Garry's never lost. He's never been finished. But I just think with what I've seen with Shavkat, I don't see any reason why it's going to stop with him, not finishing fights. And yes, minus 300 is a little steep for me, but I would take the fight Shavkat wins inside the distance. You'll get better odds there. And I do think he will finish Garry. I have a hard time seeing Shavkat winning a decision. I think if anyone wins a decision in this fight, it could be Ian Garry. But like I said, I don't even think it'll get to that point, because I see Shavkat going out there and finishing him in the third round. What I think will happen early is I think Shavkat will get a few moments in the early rounds 1 and rounds 2, where he might either tag Garry, maybe wobble him a bit, or get him against the cage and take him to the ground. I could see that happening too, and maybe not right away getting the submission. But I think by round 3, he'll figure things out, kind of like he did against Jeff Neal. Right? Jeff Neal was a 3rd round finish. I could see a similar thing happening here with Ian Garry. So my official pick is going to be Shavkat Rakhmonov, 3rd round submission over Ian Garry, getting it done. He could also knock him out, but I'll lead more submission because that's typically his bread and butter, despite how good on the ground Ian Garry has touted himself as. So I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. What is your prediction for this fight? How do you see it going down? Would love to hear from you, and let's debate this fight. It's going to be one of the best fights this year. I am really stoked for this one. I'm trying to remember the last time we had 2 undefeated fighters. Like, I'm going to have to go all the way back to like Thomas Almeida and Cody Garbrandt, the last time we had 2 undefeated fighters in a marquee fight like this. It's really, really impressive. So again, that's where I'm going with there. Follow me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, @Lynch on Sports. My name is James Lynch. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on another edition of Early Look.